Okay, I got us about a minute after the top of the hour, so let's go ahead and get started and stay on track. Again, welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Thomas Meredith, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing here at RTM Consulting. On behalf of RTM Consulting, I would like to welcome everyone to today's webcast, Helping Project Managers Get Their Groove Back. We do have a lot to cover in this hour, so I have a few housekeeping items I'll cover, and then I'll get out of the way here. So I just wanted to let everyone know a copy of the deck is available. If you're interested, on your GoToWebinar panel, there's a handouts window where you can download a PDF copy of the deck if you so choose. We are recording the webcast as well. Once we get that processed on our end, you'll receive an automated email from GoToWebinar with a link to the recording. So feel free to pass that around to any colleagues who are not able to join us today, but who you think might be interested in this content. As always, we are taking questions. Again, we don't stop the webcast for any questions, but we're covering a lot of content today. So if you see something and it triggers a question, go ahead and enter it in the GoToWebinar panel in your questions window. I'll be pulling those throughout the webcast, and we'll have a brief Q&A at the end. And finally, for anyone interested, there is one PCU available for today's webcast, a PCU for any of our RMCPs on the line. Our Resource Management Certified Professionals, they can claim that, as well as one PDU for any of our project managers on the line. The information to claim that credit will be available at the end of the webcast. We'll have a slide for you to look at for that. Okay, thank you very much. I got through my housekeeping items. I'll get out of the way and get to why we're really here. Starting off today's webinar is Managing Partner Marc Lacroix. Marc, welcome. I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks, Thomas, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. Title is Helping Project Managers Get Their Groove Back, and it's a little cheeky title, but really the essence here, and you'll see from the content, is based on a white paper that I wrote recently, and it's through the last, I'll say, a couple of years of observing the I'll say, changing role of project managers, and I'll say not all for the positive in terms of our delivery projects and project managers. So what I'm trying to do is get some attention for really rethinking and rebooting the role in the context that I see. So in order to do that, I'm going to go a little bit about what I see are some of the current state impacts. I'll introduce Dave Young as well, that's joining me, and is going to talk about the value of project management. And we're going to segue into thinking about what is the right profile for project managers in your organization, and then how to go about implementing that kind of shift. And we'll finish up with some questions. So my objectives, or our objectives for you today, are one, to understand or agree or disagree with some of the delivery dynamics and how that's affecting the role of project managers today. Review the functions that a project manager does, and how to really break these down and align them to a vision, or establishing a vision for the project management function. And then, as I said, implementing the shift would be about what are the key enablers in order to allow you to implement that vision. So we'll go through some different aspects of that, whether it's organizational, technological, and otherwise. For those of you that may or may not be familiar with us, RTM Consulting, we're a management consulting firm, primarily focuses on service organizations and trying to help them get better at what they do. We provide a wide range of consulting services, training services, as well as technology and technology enablement services. And we've been helping many global delivery organizations for over 10 years. So again, this is we're regularly putting out thought leadership to help our clients and our prospective clients continue to get better at executing their services businesses. Myself, I'm managing partner with the firm. I've been with the company for well over 9 years. My entire career has been in consulting and professional services delivery and leadership. And I'm pleased to actually also introduce Dave Young, who is joining us and is going to have a portion of this presentation as well. I'm happy to have Dave from TSIA. And Dave, I'll let you quickly introduce yourself, a little bit of your background.
Fantastic. Thanks, Marc. So a little bit about me. I've been 25 plus years in professional services and product engineering. Prior to joining TSIA last year, I was with VMware for about 10 years, holding a number of different positions, but notably running the Northeast practice as a practice manager for PS delivery, and in that role responsible for project management as well as delivery. Beyond that, ran the East Coast PM organization for a period of time for VMware as well. So I've got some background in this space, and I'm looking forward to sharing not only my experiences and insights, but also the knowledge and information from TSIA. So looking forward to participating, and thanks for the intro, Mark.
Hey, great. Thanks, Dave. So let's start by just looking at a few of what are the impacts on PMs today. One of the biggest things that I see is in the SaaS delivery model. You know, I spent a lot of my days, as Dave and I have introduced ourselves, have quite a lot of background. And back in the day when we were doing large premise-based implementations where 30 people would fly into one city and you would run huge projects. Now, that dynamic has changed. SaaS solutions have flattened out projects, have stretched projects, have made them much more iterative, and really changed the nature of what I'll call the traditional project plan. And so in doing so, it also has put some pressures, if you will, on the role and allocation of what project managers do and what their purpose is. And so when you've got these, I'll call them flatter or iterative projects, again, it changes from the thicker, longer, chunkier premise-based projects. The other thing that's clearly obvious and been in play for quite a while too is we no longer put 30 people on an airplane to go to one place all the time. We've got virtual teams. We're working across the globe. We're working even virtually pretty much on a day-to-day basis. It's almost more the de facto project style than it is to get people in a room. And so that, certainly from a project management standpoint, we know if you are a project manager, it changes the dynamic in terms of how you are able to manage and monitor and control projects, and also what it takes to do that. And so again, it's another dynamic that we've absorbed in the function, but really made it different than potentially a number of years back. And perhaps a combination of SaaS and virtual teams and the way we're organizing is more stakeholder complexity. I mean, one example is the rise in customer success as an example. You know, what TSIA, for example, puts forth a full life cycle of customer management, and it's not just sales, implementation, and support anymore. There's a lot more overlays when you put in customer success and when you put in some of these other pieces where we're trying to nurture customers over longer periods of time, less transactional. And so as project managers, we're dealing with a lot more complexity both on the client side as well as our own company in terms of different touch points getting involved with clients and simply more people wanting to interact or support, well, with all the right intentions in many cases, but what that does is it leads to a lot more complexity. So here we have changing dynamics in the size and nature of projects. We've got teams much more virtualized. And again, we have a lot more stakeholders and heads to manage or corral relative to our project delivery. So what does that kind of impact, or what does that translate to me? Well, first of all, from a SaaS standpoint, I feel the effects of speed. You know, solutions and projects, you know, we hear a lot more about speed to value, and that's the mantra for SaaS solutions is we need to get users in a high value position as quickly as possible. So let's get them using the system fast. And so what that does is it puts us into more of an iterative projects, flattening these out, a little less rigid, which some of that is positive. But when we look at it from a project management standpoint, it tends to also try to shortcut some of our basic PM practices as well in order to get to that vision. It also compresses traditional timelines and really puts a squeeze on PM functions. I mean, when you have a plan that says, I'm going to have enabled functionality for a user in 6 weeks in the first iteration, how much time do you have to actually write a work plan or put do a risk assessment or actually put an issues log in place or simply get your status template and status meetings established? You know, the cycle of time is so fast that it's putting pressure on getting some of those traditional functions done. The incredible shrinking role of the PM. I've seen this play out over the last 3 to 5 years. And I kind of say, I'm in cheek, stop the insanity. I've seen 500-hour projects with a 8-hour PM allocation. Well, that's just ridiculous. But those things are getting signed and going forward. And what that means is there's this tension between how much is actually allocated and budgeted for PM versus what is it really required to do the job, even modestly well. And there's a huge conflict there relative to funding and the allocation that PMs are getting. I've seen data that says that nearly half of PMs have 6 or more projects assigned to them at any given time. So forget about the economics of that. The sheer quality of a PM to be effective. We all can say 6 is too many. More than 6 is ridiculous. What is that right number? Again, our ability to pivot from one project to another, there's certainly lost productivity in there that's not getting accounted for. And then last, with all these stakeholders, you see reduced empowerment. People are want to manage the life cycle of the client, really important. Want to impact their customer success processes and things like that. And so again, with these additional stakeholders, we used to, in the past, really hold the PM in a higher position and certainly give them more authority so that they can affect the outcomes they need while we're in the stand-up and implementation window. Well, now that, again, you see that authority being a little bit flattened or undermined, and that's critical for PMs to have that authority. So those are just a few of the dynamics that I've observed over the last few years that are really, again, kind of leading to this breaking point, I believe, in terms of us rethinking how we're using project managers today and how we're executing the function. I'm going to turn it over to Dave now to share some of his wisdom and also some of the research at TSIA that really speaks to why it's important to continue to focus on project management and the value of the function and good project managers.
Thanks, Mark. So let me start by giving a bit of background on TSIA. There may be folks on the session here that aren't familiar with us. Our formal name is Technology Services Industry Association. And really what we do is we help technology and services companies or organizations achieve profitable growth. We do that by providing data-driven insights into business challenges, fact-based best practices. We have a pretty good idea of what good looks like based off of the data that we've been able to collect. We also provide some thought leadership. At the core of TSIA, we have 3 pillars. I'll start with community. Community is, in fact, the membership. So the association consists of a large number of members in all aspects of services. And our organization is broken up into practice areas or disciplines. I represent the PS practice, for example. But the spirit behind this is the community comes together on a regular basis through our conferences, and we share insights, we gather information, and we share experiences. And we have a collective goal of, positive outcomes, positive business outcomes. But in all that we do, it's all data-driven. So behind the data, or more to the point, the sources for the data are our benchmark study, which is a study that's been in place now since 2005. It's a perpetual study, and it's a means by which we gather insight from our membership. We also conduct and offer a market rate study, which is done every year. And we also have a compensation study, and that study's been going on for quite a while, and it is the largest location for compensation data related to professional services that we know about. We do have an active study in flight right now, which is our project performance study. And that will give us some insight to the best practices that we're seeing from our members around project planning, initiate, plan, deliver, and close. But that's kind of the nucleus of this. So for today's focus, for the next couple of slides, we're going to touch on just a few of the high-level topics that are meaningful, impactful. Go ahead to the next one, if you would, Mark. And the key here is we have a tremendous amount of data available, and we can slice and dice the data in any number of ways to get to the essence of the business challenge. But some of the more disturbing trends that we're seeing are fewer members are reporting having a formal project management methodology in place. You can actually see that declining over the last 2 years consistently. That's a bit of a concern to us, so there's a warning flag that goes up there. The second graph in the bottom right is really talking about having a formalized risk management methodology in place. And over the last 2 years, we can see a downward trend on that practice as well. There's a little bit of an uptick over the past year, but these are by far critical and very important key practices for managing to successful outcomes. So as we start to see these in a downward trend, it does become a bit alarming. So it's good to partner with, in this case, RTM, to really heighten the awareness of the importance of the PM function. Let's tie that to value. Mark, yeah, there we go, perfect. So key outcome here, right, is the way to read this is members that have a formal project management methodology, and that would be a documented methodology, right, that covers the processes involved in project management from plan through closure for services engagements. Those members that report having that in place also report higher year-on-year revenue growth. The numbers that are presented here are 7.68% higher revenue if they have it. Net in all of this is it leads to about 3.6 points higher of PS revenue growth year on year just by having that project management methodology documented and established. Let's go to the next slide, Mark. Another key aspect when we look at project management methodology is if we look at it from the dimension of combining it with a services sales methodology as well, having a formal methodology for both project management and sales, where that sales methodology includes a handoff between sales to delivery. So in this case, this data point is looking at two dimensions, project management methodology and a formalized handoff between sales and delivery. And for those members that have that, they're seeing a 57% larger deal sizes than those that don't have those items. So again, significant impact is possible because of the project management role itself. So very important. This ties to a much larger conversation. We have a whole many more slides on data and value behind this. We could certainly spend countless hours going through that, but this touches on the key points, which is increased revenue and increased deal size just by having project management in place and effective. TSIA has a point of view here, which is having a real formalized handover, and this is that handoff between sales to delivery. And project management provides a key function in all of that. We also feel very strongly that there needs to be a hand-back process. As you reach closure for that engagement, bringing that sales organization back into the storyline to explain what went well during the engagement, what didn't, but more importantly, it gives an opportunity for the delivery side of the house to uncover or share new contacts within the account, new opportunities that might have surfaced. And we're not asking or seeing PMs trying to be more of that salesperson, because selling really doesn't help. But if you can help sales, that's successful, right? So helping sells. And the key other subtle benefit that comes of this that drives to better business outcomes is when you bring sales and services together in a regular routine capacity, you get some cross-pollination, if you will, of the skills that sales brings to the table with the technical skills that services has. But the ultimate focus in all of this is by blending all of that together, you work towards better business outcomes. And from our perspective, from TSIA's perspective, project management is vital to that. So we're excited to be part of this session. We're excited to share the insights and the business intelligence that we have based off of our member data. And we look forward to kind of working closely with you all to improve on project management in large. So Mark, I think I'm a little ahead of time, so I'm going to pass it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Dave. And I think that the thing I take away from what the TSIA can reveal here is we think of project management in terms of when we're arguing with sales about getting it funded and positioning it, but I don't think people realize the economic impact it's having on your organization. There's just a couple correlations that Dave teased out, but I'm sure there are a dozen more that show where shortcutting this function is having a pretty dramatic economic impact on your project performance. Again, I like the fact that he looked at deal size. What better way to get the attention of executives in the sales team than something like that to really show that this is important. So again, there's a lot more behind that. We chose to tease out a few things.
And I think there's another segue there, Mark, just briefly, which is, the PM function itself is critical as we see more outcomes being driven by customer satisfaction or customer success, right? Mm-hmm. That role becomes vital in, ensuring that as the delivery moves through its life cycle, that it's really all about managing the successful outcomes. And bringing that back into the sales organization is important as well. But I think there's an overlap here that we're going to start to see more transformation and even more value coming up from project management as the industry starts to move towards more customer satisfaction or customer management, customer success.
Yep. Yeah, very agreed. So how do we establish the right PM profile? So let's agree that we need to reboot the profile. How do we go about that? Well, first of all, there are some factors to consider. We got to look at it a little bit from the top down in terms of our organization and how we do business. The first thing you have to consider is what's the role of services in your company. Everybody can be at a different stage or position. Are you simply a product attached organization at this stage of your maturity, or are you a true solutions organization, or almost a true standalone P&L acting somewhat independently? Let's say the product side. Again, there's a lot of differences in terms of the role you play, and that can have an effect or a factor on how this role can or should get defined. As you kind of move your way a little bit downstream, you look at what's more specifically the charter for your services organization. Are you there to make a profit? How much of a profit? Are you there to support the product? How much are you there to support the product? What's the nature in terms of, as you working with total solutions? Are you providing internal assistance with project management versus is it all for fee? So there's some different models that come into play or some angles that may influence or impact how and where you define this vision. Then there's the delivery model itself. How do you deliver? Some of our clients are heavy in partner delivery. So a lot of times your delivery model might be partner enablement more than leading projects yourself. And that's okay. That might not be the case where you're doing active project management. But a lot of times I see in those portfolios, people are doing some amount of projects that they are responsible for and leading. So again, your mix of the way you deliver and how you deliver might be a little different. You may not apply the one size fits all to each of your delivery models if you have more than one. And then, of course, too, the nature of your projects. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a future slide about some projects are really small, very transactional. The actual project itself is over very quickly. Some will have projects that go on for a year with multiple people, and we really have everything in between. And so you have to really take stock in what is the nature of my projects, nature of my portfolio, to know how I best define the role and the vision for how I want to project manage those. And I think that's also where people have gotten a little sideways, or organizations have gotten sideways, is as their projects and change, go from big to small or everything in between, they've done a really good job of adapting or rethinking how we want to project manage these. And I think that's where we've gotten a little sideways on these. Certainly with the SaaS projects, we have not really, I don't think, well adapted to rethinking project management for these types of projects. So you need to take all that into consideration as you're considering the vision for project manager. Now, once we have a vision generally sketched out, what I put in my white paper, and I use these categories, came up with really 3 categories to define the responsibilities of a project manager. One is, I'll start with the core duties, which is central. And that's what we think of the blocking and tackling of project manager. We're managing budgets, plans, resources, scope, issue, risk, and quality. Now, this is what they test us to do well, with PMI and others, is we've got to be able to do that. That's the bread and butter of what we do to get projects delivered on plan and to expectation. But what on the right side there, what we find ourselves spending a lot of time doing is doing the internal processes that our organizations and companies ask us to do. So yes, there's an element of approving time and expenses as relates to a project, I get, but a lot of times that can be a little unwieldy. Forecasting revenue, reviewing and approving invoicing, dealing with disputes and payment issues, internal communications of status to various stakeholders, and updating resource plans and things like that. I'm not saying any of these functions aren't critical, but these are things that are happening away from the client, you might say, and but are taking up a tremendous amount of effort and time of potentially our project managers to do, and in some cases maybe an inordinate amount of time that's pulling them away from their core duties. Now on the left, what I'm really posing here is that there's another category of activity that we ideally want our project managers and people in our delivery organization focused on, and that is managing our clients, effectively communicating status to our clients and all external stakeholders, including partners, ensuring customer satisfaction, right? That takes presence, that takes time to really read the customer, understand their expectations, and deliver on those expectations. Effectively managing scope and change. We know this is always an Achilles heel for us, and effectively managed scope and change requires good practices, a good execution early on, and again, good face time with your client, good interaction so that you can set those expectations and then manage those effectively. And driving upsell, cross-sell. Again, trying to make this not a transactional, making projects not transactional, but making them actually about the early stages of relationship. Again, TSIA with their layer, once we land a client, we want to make them a lifetime client. And we think that professional services, and more importantly, the project manager, is that early ambassador to the relationship that leads to a more fruitful and larger economic relationship that we want to drive. So again, you can see the things on the left there. Some of them you might say are aspirational, but I would say are things that we want to have in place. So the key theme here is we should be looking at project managers spending more of their time on the high value functions and less time on the internal processes. So I know this is easier said than done, but when you really look at the value that project managers can bring, this is where we want them putting their focus, time, and energies, because it's yielding much bigger economic benefits versus the time it takes to deal with the internal processes. So that's the premise here, is really think in terms of reshifting the focus for the project managers. So in order to do that, though, we have to change some things. I've seen, again, many clients that I've worked with have some fundamental shifts and changes to make in order to make this happen. So that's what I'm going to talk about now. Implementing the shift. So the 4 areas I'm going to cover are, one is around the value and funding. So we have to get the value and funding right. Free work does not have a long shelf life when you give away stuff or when it's underfunded. Things tend to atrophy when money doesn't come around. And so that's one of the biggest threats, I think, to good project management is we don't get enough funding for it, we don't get enough value for it. Organizing for success, we have to really rethink, again, not just what the project manager is doing, but the entire project management ecosystem and everybody around them that's interacting with it and or supporting project managers. Automation. Seen a lot of war stories, you might say, of poorly executed automation. What tends to happen is we put these great tools in front of project managers and say, use them, but we really haven't designed them from the point of view of the project manager. We've probably designed them more from the project point of view of what the finance team wants the project managers to do. And that leads to very suboptimal outcomes. And then last two, we'll talk about, got to give them the skills. So not everybody can do all those things to the left. Everybody's at different stages of their experience and career, and so we've got to focus on enabling them to do that. So let's look a little closer at each one. So getting the funding right. So this is a big thing of mine that I've always been passionate about, is the devaluing of the project management. I'm sure each of you that are listening in have been or seen or been a part of arguments between services, sales, and the customer to say, why am I paying for project management? Why am I'm just paying for you to make sure that your processes are going okay, that I'm getting no value from it. I don't want to pay for it. And oftentimes salespeople are willingly put pressure to strike that line item altogether. And this happens day in and day out. And so there's a few things that have to be done to address that. Because again, as I said, unfunded things don't go well, because when value doesn't flow to it, it's a reflection of how much people value it and support it. Now, I don't know if everybody knows this or not. I still have some people that say, but the industry standard is 15% to 20% of every project. I'm talking hours or dollars, but I usually think in hours, needs to go towards project management. That's just a standard. That's been around as long as I've been consulting. You ask any of the traditional consulting firms, this is just a de facto standard that we work with. And so why that isn't just default applied in every case across all companies, it really takes the argument away from anybody to just say, how can you not agree with this is the way Accenture and Capgemini and all the big players have been doing it for 25 years. This is the standard. So that's not negotiable. It's not really an arguable point here. And so if I use that as a basis, and I use this graph that I have showing here. Now this is if I'll try to explain this graph, what I'm trying to do is show a correlation between the allocation of a PM and how much funding there is. And I'm using the 15 to 20% as a guideline. So the bigger my project, of course, the more funding and or allocation I get of a PM. And so somewhere, between the $400,000 and $500,000 range with a reasonable duration, I get to a full-time PM. And then, sliding backwards, you get to 50% allocation and things like that. So what I'm kind of making the case for that there's a minimum practical allocation. I mentioned earlier that the incredible shrinking allocation of PMs, that really I'm showing probably a 3 to 4 projects is the max to any project manager doing it effectively. And so with that as the basis, there is a threshold of which you get below that, and it doesn't become practical to maybe approach the project with traditional or typical PM practices and things like that. So for the projects that I would say value between 50 and 500K, have standard and simple allocation increments as well. So 25, 50, 75%. Don't do the opposite, which is, can John Smith handle one more project? Okay, let's throw one more project at him. He'll figure it out. And then let's throw one more project at him until he screams and breaks. That's what I see happening. What we should get to is more of a spectrum of from minimum to well, there's really no maximum, and what those allocations can be at those different points. So what's the size project where we want to allocate at 50%? What's the size projects we want to allocate at 25? Don't allocate 32% or 28%. Do 25, 50, 75 until you get to full time. But don't go below 25% either. That breaks the 1-to-4 ratio, because then I see people doing 10%. Well, then what that does, it leads to 10 projects. If you think you can reasonably allocate some of that, you can't. So when you get to projects that are that small and you don't have as much budget allocation, you might have to think of a different way to approach those. Maybe you do pool them, and your project management methodology and approach is a little bit different. You have a group of projects that are quick and transactional and small. So change your methodology and make it skinnier, make it easier to manage, make it a little more transactional. The problem is people don't adapt their approach to bigger and smaller. They tend to either try to adapt a big project approach into a small approach, but probably worse, what they do is they get used to managing in the small approach world, and when they do get to the bigger, they tend to shortcut some of the key processes, and that introduces a lot of risk into the project and ultimately leads to some bad things happening. So again, think of the economics first in terms of the 15 to 20% standard. Fight for that standard, educate people about it. And if you need me to come in and tell them, I will. Then also have some rationality about how you allocate in logical chunks of 25%. And then again, if you have a lot in your portfolio that's 50,000 or lower, quick transactional, rethink a little bit about how to apply project management there. Now, organizing for success, the standard PM funding for a project doesn't necessarily have to assume one resource. I'm not really necessarily talking about one person all the time. So when we get to certain projects of certain size, and in this case, let's just assume that these are projects that are performing core duties and high value functions, projects 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So here is what I commonly see are two of the most pervasive practices or options that you have if you don't already have them in place right now. Well, with the internal processes, the premise here is that we do have to interact with finance. We do have to interact with billing. We do have to interact with HR and RM in terms of resourcing. And we do have to deal with internal stakeholders for governance data. So these are things that have to get done with the project and that your company and organization require with each project. And that's okay, and that's fine. The question is, who's helping make these activities happen? Who normally is helping facilitate with the internal duties? Well, one common practice is that you do have a delivery operations team that has some degree of scope. The larger the scope, I think, the better in many cases, where they tend to be the facilitators to these back office processes. Now, this tends to be a pool team by region or by practice that really knows the portfolio and the customer base generally well, and they do a lot to facilitate a lot of the back office processes. Billing is a good example. When they're the ones that know when it's time or when the triggers occur to initiate invoicing and billing. And so then they'll work on behalf of the project manager to make sure that bill is triggered and gets created and ultimately gets sent to the client. So it's a common back office process that really, again, we know that ultimately the project manager is responsible, but the amount of time it takes to trigger, notify, review, double check, send, is a lot of extra time for project managers that can be diverted to these kinds of teams. Now, in this case, there's no direct project alignment with a pool team like this. The other option out there that we see as a common practice is called the project coordination function. So this is a little bit different, and the two can coexist actually in certain organizations. But in this case, you actually have a role called project coordinator. And they more align directly to projects and directly to project managers. So it may be a one-to-many, it usually is, but they are, again, more tied to the specific project and the success of those specific projects. And so what you get out of that is a little more ownership and a little more rhythm between project coordinators and the project managers they support. And so they get to know each other better. They can anticipate, they can get a little more aware of the inner workings of the project. And in doing so, they can do more. This also creates a proving ground for potentially future project managers as well. Project coordinators can eventually maybe elevate to and aspire to be project managers one day. This is a good training ground for that. So when you look at organizing for success and putting yourself in a position to deal with those responsibilities that I laid out before, you want to look at some options you've got, where you're at today, some options of what's going on in the marketplace today in the industry of how robust is your operations team, and also do you have a project coordination function. Again, as I've said before, I don't think the answer is to heap on more of the internal duties to the project manager. If anything, we're trying to find ways to alleviate some of those internal processes and duties so again, they can work on more of the higher value functions. Now, automation. This is, again, an area where I've seen has been poorly executed because, again, I don't think there's been a good vision for what we want project managers to do. And so we just tend to throw things at them that we think are good or that our vendors tell us are the right thing, but we don't really actually support that with the right foundation of what we're trying to do. And so one of the key anchors here, though, is that in terms of leading our best practice is that project managers really must manage the information associated with their budgets, plans, and resources on a regular basis in a centrally deployed application. So if you take that as my premise, you say, well, gosh, Mark, you're basically telling me that I need my project managers in the system. And we're saying yes. Now, what we need to do, though, is make that a productive and good experience for the PMs that everybody's getting value from. And that's really where it breaks down, or that's really the challenge. But again, think of the project managers, and I talk to my technology practice leaders, if we don't have project managers updating project plans and resource plans, we're dead as an organization. We don't know where we're at and where we're going. So project managers are critical, and those projects, where it's going, tells us everything about where our business is going. So we can't not have them in there managing this data for us, so we can really keep our organization proactive and looking forward. So what are the things that we need to focus on relative to enabling good technology with PSAs and TPMs here? One is really focus on optimizing the core duties: budget, plan, resource management. Hold PMs accountable to regular weekly updates of this information. And the most important thing is, what are the hours? It's basic stuff here, right? Who's working on what? I'm not saying we have to have granular task plans in there, but what I'm saying is that you have to have your plan versus your burn versus your estimates complete. You need to know what your resource allocations are, what you expect them to burn, what hours over what periods of time. And then you need to be updating that on a regular basis. This helps the engine of how much money we're anticipating to make, how we look for governance and red flags of projects that need extra attention, things like that. So again, without doing this basic core duties systematically in a shared enterprise system, nobody's going to get the visibility, and it's going to lead to a tremendous amount of manual work. Ideally, too, we want to optimize these internal processes fully, but we want to really look at it from a view of who's really doing the function and how we're doing it. So we don't want to necessarily automate so that the PM does everything. What we'd like to do is automate it so that they get the right amount of other actors involved, whether it's a project coordinator or an operations team, that really can take on the huge amount of the load. And so maybe there's some workflow that allows the PM to approve something, but let's construct and execute the process largely without the PM and only get them involved at specific points in time, if at all. So again, really rethinking how we can, again, automate those, make them more flow through and seamless, and just get the PM involved when there's exception handling required. Focus on the capabilities really to help them move to those higher value functions. So you might say, well, look at those. I can't put in automation to help them manage customers better, but you can actually. There are now collaboration platforms and capabilities where, are you making it easy for customers to provide status to their customers and to communicate to their customers? Scope and change management. How easy is it to execute scope and change management in your environment? Because again, the harder it is to execute technically, the harder it is for PMs to actually want to do it. So there's a lot that you can improve here when you really think about it. If you look at those high value functions and think, how can I give the tools to PMs to make them do those better? There's a lot of room for improvement. Flexibility. I've mentioned not all projects should be the same or are the same. And so what turns project managers off is when they're asked to do the same thing, whether it's a $10,000 project or $1 million project. And that's when you start to lose some credibility with them, is that they're doing things that they know are fairly overkill or silly relative to the size of the project or the complexity of the project. And I think today the solutions are very good at this in terms of giving you templates and ways to recognize that not all projects are the same, and there can be different or skinny down approaches to project setup or project change and project management. And then last is, and I'll say this the part underlined first, is we want to make the application a place where PMs want to and need to go. And we do that with visibility and data. So we have to really turn the perception around here to say that PMs, we need to do this in a way where this is your command and control. Stop going to the spreadsheet, stop going to your own, hard drive tool there. Go here and manage your budget here and keep track of what's going on there and track the time of all the people. It's all here. So let's make that the experience where we give you the visibility to where it's a necessity to go here and get what you need. Again, we don't always design the solution with the PM in mind. And I think that's what I'm promoting here is, implement the solution with the PM in mind and what they're trying to do. And last is give them the skills. So you have to ask yourself, how effective is your PM organization and each individual at the following skills. Certainly when we're talking about some of more of the higher value functions. You know, the ability to position value, right, which is important in terms of sustainability and upselling, cross-selling, effectively communicating, getting to trusted advisor status, delivering on outcomes, just basic relationship management, dealing with a variety of people, upselling. Again, how comfortable are they just positioning some add-on work, some additional work, scope management, issue and risk management, the economics of PS. How does this all work? You know, if we want our PMs out there talking to customers about additional work, you know, are they somewhat fluent in how our contracts and our SWs get executed? Expectations and management. So these are quite a range of things, but I guess kind of fall into a variety of you know, soft skills, if you will, and the skills to be successful at being a high value project manager. And this is where our emphasis needs to be. I mean, we can talk all day long about some of the back office things, but if I'm placing my money on skilling up PMs, I want them learning this stuff. And you know, the point being here is that these skills can be taught and they can be learned. You're going to have PMs that are in a wide range of aptitude around some of these. And the goal is to put these trainings in place and get people through some of this training to move them along the spectrum. Some are going to be very good, some are just starting out. But if you can get your project managers and project management team good at these functions, you've got a pretty darn powerful team, and you're going to be able to execute those high value functions very well. So that's my thoughts on how to implement it around 3 lines. So, you know, key to keep in mind here, kind of recapping what we've been talking about, is one, there are new dynamics. You know, we can't ignore the fact that the way we're delivering today is different than we did 3 years ago, 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago. And these dynamics are here to stay, and we need to adapt to them. So we have to rethink of our vision of how we want to use PMs and how PMs need to function in our organization and for our projects and for our portfolios, more importantly, though, for our customers. And so once we are able to establish that vision, then we need to implement the recommendations and really get their groove back. I know this comes from how Stellar got a groove back, but again, we want PMs to get back to being the critical, important, and powerful part of the organization that really drives so many good things that come out of that. And what are some of those good things? Clearly, higher project margins. That's another correlation I'm sure that Dave and TSIA could show you, is when project managers are in there doing their thing, we do better on projects, no doubt about it. Cross-sell, upsell, expanding the pie. We've got tons of information and data that says that when project managers are heavily engaged and talk to clients, it's much easier to expand the revenue pie. Happy clients, Dave mentioned this. Let's not underestimate how important it is to make clients happy all the time. That leads to more revenue and more profit in general. And happier clients too. You're going to have happier project managers, but you're going to also have happier consultant staff as well. Because again, projects are well organized, they're going well, they're well managed, and that takes a lot of the pain and stress off of the team. So again, hope you found all that useful. As Thomas mentioned, we'll make this available. There's a white paper that underpins this whole webinar that's available as well. So with that, Thomas, I'll turn it back over to you, and we got a little bit of time for any questions that might be out there.
Thank you, Mark. Really good stuff there. Thank you for that. Yeah, we do have questions coming in, so I'm starting to gather those. But let me first mention, like I did at the top of the broadcast, that you have the ability to claim a PCU or a PDU. A PCU for our RMCP folks on the line. So just visit the PCU submission page on the website there at the resourcemanagementinstitute.com website. You can click on the blue submit button. That'll log you into the LMS, where you can enter your ID number and activity name description to get credit for that. And for our project managers, we do have PDU credit available there. Provider name is RTM Consulting. You see the provider number there, as well as the activity number. We do have some questions coming in, so let me get to those, Mark, and then Dave as well. Feel free to give any perspective you want on these as well. Mark, this one came in when you had the Organize for Success slide up, and you were talking about the project coordination function. This one came in. She said, "We currently do have project coordinators, but we don't charge for them. Should we?" So should they?
Yes. I say that, yeah, no, I say that tongue in cheek, but the philosophy that I've always held on to, and welcome your input too, Dave, is that project management is a function you pay for. And so it doesn't mean that you're paying for a person. It means you're paying to get the job done. That's why the 15 to 20% rule is what is it going to take to manage the project effectively? Now, some people will say that, you know, charging to get somebody to get bills out the door is not fair to the client. Well, to me, that's splitting hairs. To me, a project coordinator is really a helper, assistant to the project manager, delivering a project on behalf of the client. So there is some gray area, but I always err more towards I'm trying to fund a delivery motion that helps make the customer successful. And I look at it through that lens. I don't look at it through, I'm trying to get the client to pay to do my work. You got to change that mindset and say, what does it take so that I can effectively manage this project and deliver it successfully for the client? And some of that, you know, is a little bit of gray area, but is work that has to get done to be successful. So I err more towards, again, the 15 to 20%, and try to get some of that funding directed towards the project coordination function.
I think to add to that a little bit, Mark, which is a slightly different view on this, these types of decisions always have to be made in the context of the PS charter, right? So if the PS charter is more about customer acquisition or customer adoption and less about PS profitability or PS revenue, if the PS charter is all about product adoption, then there certainly would be opportunities where that work might be for free because it's just part of accelerating the adoption of the product. So it really, you know, the message here has to, these types of decisions have to be put into the context of what's the overarching PS charter, and making sure these decisions are aligned to that is vital for long term. Now, if the charter is all about PS profitability and PS revenue, then it's an obvious answer, yes, we should be charging for that type of thing.
Thank you both. Thank you both for the perspectives on that. Another one came in here. Mark, we have a problem selling the value to our own salespeople, much less the customer. What advice do you have to overcome this problem of selling value?
So I mentioned in the white paper, I think I made a reference to it here, of the downward spiral of PM value. And what I mean by that is it is a self-defeating death spiral that you fall into. And I see some of my clients get into it where if you don't get any funding for the PM, then you don't put enough time into it to do the job well, which then the sales team and others see that you're not doing it well, which further erodes their belief that the function's even useful. And it kind of gets into this negative thing where you can't get out of it because you can never do the job right and show the client, show sales how it's done and how much it helps. And so that's kind of the challenge that you're trying to extract yourself out of when I hear this and when I see people like that. I think that, again, going back to what I've used effectively is the 15 to 20% rule to say, why are we getting away from that? But then you also have to live up to it. You've got to put the right people, the right allocation to get the job done right. Many of you do have PM processes and documented things, but what you'll tell me is I don't have the time to execute that. And so, you've got to fight for that. You got to fight to be able to execute it right. And so, again, you're not going to do it by, by constantly getting compromised in terms of the funding for it. So, again, fight for the 15, 20%, but when you get it, put your processes in place and do it effectively. And then you're able to then use those cases to, to try to educate or show the salespeople, see how much easier and pain-free this project was relative to the one that you didn't have any funding for. And usually you can point to those anecdotes too, to, project A versus project B, and people will go, yeah, I can see the difference, because there's usually a pretty marked difference.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think we have time. Yeah, we got time for one more here. I want to get this one in because I know we run into this one a lot. Mark, this came in when you had your importance of automation slide up, and it said that we don't get a lot of value from our current PSA. Are there any specific PSAs that do this well?
I think, well, I'll be, I'm not being political here. I'm just saying, I think that I can't single out any one PSA that does it better or worse necessarily. I think they all have very good capability. I think it really gets into the vision thing. I think that I can't say that some do it better than others. That to me is splitting hairs. I think that most people go into it, as I use the example of the requirements and how it was designed was because finance needs a revenue forecast. And so all of the PM's job, or the way they were supposed to interact with the system, was so that finance can get a revenue forecast. Well, if you design the solution with that in mind, guess what? The PM experience is probably not going to be ideal. But if you go in and you look at your solution to say, how am I trying to, some of the things that I put out there, how am I trying to make this good for the PM? I think you're going to have a totally different solution with the same product. So I'm challenging everybody out there to say, rethink how you use your current platform. I think you'll find it can be a totally different application for you if you really put those requirements against it versus how you've designed it to date.
Okay, excellent. Good advice there, Mark. Appreciate that. Okay, look, we're approaching the top of the hour here. We're running out of our questions here, so let me stick to our allotted time here. And I just want to here and thank everyone on the line for joining us today to cover this subject. It's something we definitely feel strongly about. Dave, on behalf of TSIA, thank you for joining us as well and giving us your perspective. And Mark, of course, thank you for sharing your thoughts on the subject.
Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Dave.
All right. And with that, everyone, we'll sign off. Thank you for joining us again, and have a great day.